there were. Hi, so I just wanted to introduce myself, and I guess also if after I introduce myself, I'm not sure who all is attending virtually, so oh, sorry, that's okay. In a second, maybe I can figure out who all is present. But quick introduction, I'm Millie Sullivan. I'm a associate professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at the University of Delaware. And I am looking forward to virtually meeting a bunch of you and actually, well, seeing several of you here, and wanted to just informally share a few thoughts on starting a career in academia, at least from my own experiences. And so before I sort of give you the 30-second version of background, who all is participating virtually? Anyone? No one? Okay. All right, so then I think I'm talking to you too, which makes it easier and interesting that we have the recording thing, but maybe people will drop in. So I think we've talked, and both of you know at least something about me based on those conversations, but I threw this up there mostly just because as an engineer talking to physicians, I had some questions which I was directing to Kevin in part on what I would be able to offer to you because my background is quite different. So I put together what I thought might be useful, and you guys can ask whatever questions you have, and I will do my best to answer. So the 10-second thing on research, which I know isn't the focus, but I thought might be useful, especially if there's anything at all that rings a bell in terms of areas that might be relevant in terms of funding agencies. I do have funding from NIH and NSF, as well as NIST and DOD and a few other places. So I think certainly the funding agencies we might consider are at least in part largely overlapping, though probably not entirely, even though I'm an engineer. So, but the main focus areas in our research, the overlying theme is in drug and gene delivery, and really the thing that we are interested in is learning how to design and also exploit stimuli-responsive molecules and also stimuli-responsive nanostructures. And the goal there is to understand how we could control the self-assembly and disassembly of these structures for the purpose of trying to do a better job of targeting drugs and also releasing those drugs at the right locations. Application areas that we've been pursuing to date include drug delivery for inflammatory breast cancer and gene and RNA delivery for bone repair and also wound healing. So just, what's the last one? For wound healing, so gene therapies and wound healing. And so I put together just a few main points of things that I thought I'd try to cover. And again, I probably have more material than is necessary. So just let me know what you want to hear about or what seems really obvious, if it does seem really obvious. I put grant writing and mentoring at the bottom, not because I don't think they're important, but because I know there have been I saw some of the other talks that were given through this network, and it looked like there was a large focus on grant writing. So I put a little bit in with my own 2 cents worth, and we can talk as much as you want about that, but I know you've heard about that already. So, so I think what I wanted to start with is just things related to defining a research program. And I know, both of you are already established in terms of, being here. And this is maybe something that sounds like, you would have done it before you started. But I think it's something for me that's been really an active and a continuous process. Even now, 9 years into my, job as a professor. And so what I mean here is really thinking about the ways that your research program is defined, not as some subset of a bunch of projects, but really what is the central overlying theme that defines you as a researcher and that is going to allow other people to say, hey, I really want to work with Matt, I really want to work with Deepthi. They do this very exciting thing that's only theirs. And I think that's something that's really difficult to do, and it also evolves. And so for me, I think the defining process has been a few things, some of which are here. I mean, I think part of it is, what in your training gives you tools that make you unique. I mean, we've all had different training experiences that bring in pieces of different, mentors' approaches, and I think certainly that's one part of what makes a person unique as a researcher. But I think more than that, as you develop, especially in the institution that you're at, then you begin to, certainly I felt that I've gotten a better sense of the approaches that I have to research. What are the specific things about doing research that really get me excited? And I think that's also very strongly influenced by the environment that is around you at your own institution. And so I think for me, the ability to understand how I think, and it sounds very much like a personality test, but has been really an integral part of trying to define a research program. And so that was one thing I just wanted to comment on. I think this is the last bullet, but I know one way that I've thought about this is just sort of continuously evaluating and reevaluating and rewriting my elevator speech, right? And you've probably had this advice, or maybe you've had this advice that you need to be able to, define your research program to somebody else, in a 2-minute version, in the 5-minute version, and certainly in the longer version. Usually it's easier to do the long version because then you get to put in all the details. And I think what it comes down to with the elevator speech that makes it so hard is then you've got, you got your 30 seconds to hook somebody and explain, why am I different from my mentor? Why would you want to work with me? And I know for me, that's also been hard because I think, there's the social thing of, one is trained by one's parents to not sort of, talk about yourself. And so there's how do you do that? How do you talk about what you do and put it out there in a way that explains what you think are your impacts without sort of crossing the comfort level in terms of what feels like, unnecessary fanfare or that sort of thing. So that was, a couple of the things I wanted to start with. And I think part of that too is just looking at ways to identify really the unsolved problems that your unique skills can address. And so I think that for me has also been something that's helped me to understand what it is that makes me unique. And so it's been networking with people who do things that are definitely different from what I do, related enough that certainly we have common ground to talk about, but working with several of the faculty up here at Nemours. I have a collaborator at Penn and a collaborator at Jefferson as well. And that's on the more sort of clinical translational end of things. That we're not at all clinical at the moment, we're all preclinical, but on the other end of things, I also collaborate quite a bit with more fundamentally chemistry sorts of faculty at University of Delaware and a couple of other places. And so I think for me then, the working with the people who have a little bit of overlap in terms of interest, but are for the most part really complementary, has been the eye-opening way to sort of define, okay, so now I understand what I can offer in this problem. And I think also that, and this is, I'm sort of getting ahead of myself because this is on the next slide, but I think, you want to be defining problems to work on that on the one hand have familiarity that you can actually execute and accomplish successfully, but you also, in order to make that name for yourself, I think there's that need to begin to look at really new problems. And that's where you're going to make your name and your impact. And so I think the way to find those problems is really to talk to people who think differently than you. And for me, one of the other, and it sounds enormously cheesy, but there's this National Academy of Engineering Grand Challenges list of topics that was published in, I think, 2008 or something like that. And I know it's it's engineering, but there's a whole list of things, many of them are totally non-health related, but there's a whole segment on engineering better medicines, and there's other biomedically related problems on there. And what I found really useful about that is thinking about, who of us can really see into the future in terms of what areas you could be working on that will have impact when you get there, as opposed to things that people think are important right now, which then one ends up behind the curve if you're an assistant professor, because by the time you get your expertise sharpened up and you're then working on the problems that seem important now, then they've become yesterday's news. And so I think looking at what are the future problems going to be is something that that would be useful. So anyway, remind me I know you've been working here in your research for maybe 3 years? Okay. And how long have you worked in here at Nemours and
So I've been at Nemours almost 4 years.
Gotcha.
And the first year or two, the research was more social sector practice transformation. And in the course of seeing patients and thinking about that, a couple of observations were made that made me want to put on the translational hat. And that's why we're looking at satiety, appetite regulation, and obesity, and this gut enzyme that I studied 10 years ago in my grad school days.
Yep.
So that has been 2 years.
Yeah.
Almost.
Gotcha.
With really the last year, the biggest push, because the CTR grant.
That's awesome. And then, I know you both are certainly also then spending lots and lots of time in the clinic versus research. And how much time do you do in each one of those activities?
So I'm 60-40.
You're 60-40, so 60 is clinical. Yeah.
I'm saying it's been an evolving.
Definitely an evolving thing.
Yeah.
Started out with 100% clinical and
Correct.
down to 60%.
Gotcha.
I went 100, 80, now 60.
Well, I guess we should say 120.
That's
started.
Well, you more than me, because you have inpatient responsibilities, which I've never had.
Yeah.
I do all outpatients.
Yeah.
But it seems moving in a good direction.
Yeah. No, I mean, so those are challenges that, I mean, the basis I have for understanding that, I mean, I have the majority of my time dedicated to research. It's 60% research, and then the remainder is a mixture of service and teaching. And the teaching can be quite time consuming, but I can only imagine especially, being married to Kevin.
Well, we have a lot of
the balancing act is,
clinical creep, I like to call it.
Yeah.
Or clinic creep, you have your protected time, but it's very easy for clinical problems to that time. The other way around doesn't happen as much.
Yeah.
Or it's not as time consuming. If you have a little research issue that comes up on a clinical day, it can usually be handled, but you're not doing a lit search or writing a grant that day.
Yeah.
But if you're doing your research day and the patient comes in sick and has an issue, or you get called to cover or whatever, that's a very different kind of creep.
Yeah.
Imbalance. But I agree with you that it's been moving in the right direction.
It's moving in the right direction, but it's enormously challenging.
It's challenging.
Yeah, particularly because it's not like an already well-established academic research institution. It's primarily a clinical hospital, clinical institution, and it's trying to become more and more academic.
Yep.
So I guess that's one of the reasons why it's still a moving.
Yeah.
We're all trying to figure out at the same time.
I agree.
So to what extent, and I think there's it helps for me to just understand the perspectives too. So to what extent do you have dedicated lab space and dedicated, you have the time, which is I think a big part, but what's the framework?
I do have a dedicated lab space. I've recently had challenges with a dedicated technician to help me with the lab.
Right.
So,
and is that something that is potentially provided by Nemours, or that's you have to go get the money for anything like that?
Well, it's part of the lung center, which is part of the Nemours network. So that's been one of the challenge. Which is also something I'm moving.
Meaning there's a technician who's
who was
working at the lung center who was helping.
Then she resigned, so she knew most of the techniques that were being done. So
got it.
Now, and I was still in the learning phase.
Yep.
And now there are new people that I'm trying to teach, which I only know halfway through, kind of. So that's there, but it's getting better.
Right, and this is a technician that so the funding for the technician is provided by Nemours and the Lung Center, but then the technician is a shared technician, or is yours, or?
So she was working on my mentors' projects mostly, and then since for the past year, it's mostly been the projects that I have been involved. So I haven't had to share her with anybody else in the recent past.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. I know you're working with Lacey, but yeah. So are you? And you're
So my division had a functioning lab that was the division's lab to do some of the clinical testing that isn't done in our main clinical hospital lab, but also to do research projects.
Yeah.
And so no one came to me and said, hey, we've got this lab space that you can use. But when I said, I'd like to do this project and it's going to require some bench time, they said, oh, go talk to the folks in the BI lab. So I have a person who works in the lab that I have a piece of her time paid for on the grant.
Got it.
And then the head of the lab is a member of our division, PhD, and she is a collaborator on co-investing.
Got it.
So I was fortunate to be able to plug into that already established model, but I would have to pay for any future technician out of funding.
Got it.
But they would never say no to me bringing those funds and hiring somebody as long as I have the money. But if I wanted to do something and not pay for the person's time or the supplies, I'm not sure if that would be available. Without the grant support. And I think that our divisions are unique because you're interested in it's a lung center. I'm interested in GI stuff. We have a small GI lab. I don't know about radiology. Oncology I do, but some of the other specialties may not have that already established setup. So I just don't know if it would be available to everyone. I think we're pretty fortunate to some extent to have this lab to connect with. Could be better, but
no, that helps a bunch.
Is that what you were asking, though?
Absolutely. No, I wanted to get a sense for. I mean, I've prepared a bunch of stuff, but it's easier to just kind of know what you want to know about, or what would be useful to you. Because I think certainly the context that I've done research in is very different, but then I think probably the strategies are still applicable, and hopefully. But so I guess the other two questions. One is, to what extent do you now, or will you in the future, have access to trainees like fellows as potential staff? Is that something that you can do or are interested in, et cetera? I think it's just the three of us, so we're sort of having a conversation too, so I can just kind of get a sense for.
Are there people online?
There weren't.
We don't think so.
Let me double check.
We don't know.
Well, there were like 10 people that signed up to be online.
Yeah, well, if there are, then
I was told to do
move
this.
forward. What's that?
I was told to do this.
Okay.
Hang on.
Maybe there are.
Okay.
Is that the mute button or something?
No, that's because it's cut the top of me.
Oh.
Aaron's like watching in the other room, so I have to go back.
Okay.
Hi, Aaron.
Has anyone else signed in? Because we're sort of now digressing into a longer conversation on. Okay.
So there are fellows in GI. They're here for 3 years. They have to do their own project. If any one of them expressed an interest in what I were doing, I could use them or employ them or work with them or collaborate with them or whatever, but I'm not sure it's an automatic resource.
Okay.
And they are paid differently, and there's research monies for them that are separate from any that I have or could get. So I don't know how that would work, but at least
maybe it's a resource.
Yeah. As far as summer students, I've been fortunate enough to be able to get one through the program, and if I have a need next summer, I will do that again.
Yeah.
That's me.
Yeah, I mean, I had a follow-up.
You're being watched.
I'm being watched. Oh, okay. I should maybe, I don't know if, we've been sort of conversing a little bit about just resources here.
Still raise their hands or something electronically.
If they have questions or if we're digressing too much into, anyway. Okay.
They're just not video linked, but they're listening.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't want to, anyway.
You're all good.
Okay. Anyway.
We certainly have fellows. I had one fellow work with me.
Yep.
She's actually going to be an attending.
I'm sorry.
She's joining our group now.
Gotcha.
But I guess it mostly depends on the fellows' interests. I find most are interested in like clinical projects, not necessarily lab-based projects.
Yep.
So that could be a reason.
Okay. Yeah. No, well, that helps just for. I have some stuff as well about sort of building a research program and team and that sort of thing, and was curious about what was available for resources for you. Okay. Anything? I don't know. I've covered most of this, so I'll move on. So other things, I guess I had I thought I wanted to raise as some important pieces of just the defining of the research program aspect of this is something that I don't know that I did extremely well at the beginning, and then sort of backpedaled and then recalibrated, and that's and this sounds like financial management or something, but I think it's really essential to seek a balance of risk as you build and define your research portfolio. And so, this is something for me where, you walk in as a new faculty, and I know I had some grand ideas about what I'd be able to do, which didn't necessarily correlate with things that were going to be feasible as somebody who had to start a new lab and had to build all the personnel up. And I mean, I've heard this from both of you in terms of the challenges of, having personnel turnover at times you don't expect and things like that. And so I think my backpedaling then went to, really building in as an important component in addition to the high risk projects, which I do think are important, is having, and however big your program is, and it'll undoubtedly change as your career progresses. But I think, especially early career, but I think always having some quantity of your program focused on the relatively low risk, but also probably low reward research projects is something that you have to do. And depending on your approach to research, I mean, I think some people start all there and no high risk. And in my case, I jumped into the high risk thinking it sounded super exciting and didn't have enough of the low risk initially. But I think you want to have those research projects that are designed probably very closely based on research that you did, previously as a trainee yourself, and that follow really a lot of what you did previously in terms of the methods, et cetera, and all of that. And so I think, especially when you're building your research team and, you're learning about your resources within your institution, I think it's essential to have that sort of, you've got to have some things that are controls. And so the controls have to be things that you know how to do and you know how to execute, and that you can publish because you have to publish, because you have to get the both internal and external credibility in terms of just the capacity to do something that is, maybe it's not the most groundbreaking thing in the world, but at the very least, it shows that you have a working instrument that is your lab and your staff and all of that stuff. And that, more than any description you'd ever put in of the resources at your institution, is going to be the thing that says, I am a viable researcher. I have a publication record. It doesn't mean low quality publications, but it may mean that they aren't, the ones that sort of the world changing ones that, maybe, you dream about or whatever. So I think, and I don't know where both of you started in terms of your thought process, and, you may have been smarter than me and didn't jump into the completely impossible high-risk project first. So, if you started there, that's perfect. I think wherever you started, it is also important at some point to build in that component of high-risk types of projects. So the things that seem a little crazy, and the challenge here is really defining how crazy is a little crazy. And I think you obviously have to have some amount of skills to execute what you're planning on doing, but you also can, and this goes back to the comment on the previous slide, the idea of sort of trying to push the envelope and gain diverse research exposure to identify really important unsolved problems where you can find a niche for your expertise, right? And so I think if you can do that, even if you're not able to do the entire thing that you envision, if you can plug in your cog that is really the critical piece that has been blocking progress, if you can find those problems, then you can also find, and I have another thing on collaborations and finding collaborators. But I think then if you can find collaborators to begin to fill in some of the other pieces that maybe you can't do well, I think that's the way to begin to approach the high risk types of projects. And I think these are essential. And ultimately, I think your success in doing the high risk projects builds on the success in the low risk projects. And also that success in the high risk types of projects that's the thing that will make you ultimately a viable long-term continuing scientist, because that's the thing that's going to bring in, maybe they seem, well, whatever. Not that citations are the be-all, end-all, but you need to have the visibility in the external and internal communities to bring in, funding, to bring in new collaborators, and really to have a name that says, again, this is my stamp, this is what I do, right? So, I don't know. I'll just keep going if you guys have questions, and just at me and shut me up. So I think, another essential piece that we've already talked about a little bit, but I wanted to comment on some more, is building a team, both in terms of a collaborative network and also in terms of the more local network of actual personnel that you have working with you. And so I think this is something, and again, I didn't focus a lot on grant writing because I saw that the other talks had focused a lot on grant writing, so I have a little bit on that, and part of it comes into this too, but I think it becomes really important in terms of success in funding, and also your ability to be innovative, to identify good collaborators, and to be able to go out in your grant proposals and explain that, not only do I have the idea, I have the team. And there really are very few projects, I think, anymore that are fundable that don't involve a team. There's almost always somebody who's leading the effort. Hopefully, there should be someone leading the effort, but I think that the sort of days of the single investigator grant are just gone. You can't go out and ask for money and say, well, I'm going to figure all that stuff out later. The pay lines now are so low that you're not going to get away with that, and maybe rightfully so, I don't know. But I think being able to articulate in your grants that you have a solid and substantive collaborative network is absolutely essential. And so I think there's a few ways to do this. I think some of the immediate things that can really, I see I've been a bit redundant here, tap your immediate network immediately. So, I think some of the things that you've probably already done, but certainly I'll just emphasize again. I think giving and seeking opportunities to give local and regional seminars in your institution, in the Excel network, and if you guys have interest in at any point trying to find collaborators in a particular area that may be at UD, for example, certainly let me know. I'll do my best to, or let Rob know he's got lots of connections there too. So, but I think, strangely enough, I started collaborations with people in my department and related departments at UD because I gave seminars on campus. And it's not that they didn't know I was there and they didn't have some vague idea of what I was doing, but it was, it's when you get up and you actually share some of the details that people's minds sort of get going, and they get excited about something and what they could do with it. And inevitably that leads to something you didn't think about previously that is probably higher risk, but also more interesting than what you were, maybe what you already did on your own. So I think seminars are a great way to do this. I think picking up the phone, when you start to, if you have an idea and you think I can't do this because I don't know how to do X, Y, and Z, the local regional network it's not that it has everything always, and it doesn't always have the leading expert, world's leading expert in everything, but what it does have is you can go to their office and knock on their door and have a face-to-face conversation, and I think that's essential. And so I think, there were a number of occasions where I just sent emails or gave, phone calls to people that I'd never met, as a grad student, as a postdoc, but also as a new faculty member, just to begin to get a sense for who was out there and whether I was able to have a conversation with the person in the first place, because regardless of whether my research appeared to be complementary to theirs, there's also the interpersonal thing that has to work well. I sort of gave with a grain of salt the idea of consider contacting colleagues you met through former research advisors. I think this is a potential viable source for finding collaborators, but I think also that you need to be setting yourself apart from your former advisor, and that often contacting someone that already works with your former advisor leads to you putting in proposals that are covering the same sort of complementary ground as your former advisor, who is inevitably much better established than you are. So I think that's maybe the best success I've had in this area has been working with former postdocs who worked for the same person I worked for. And those people don't continue to work with our former advisor either. And so we've worked together because we do have different expertise, and that's been a good forward. So maybe these are really obvious, but I'll just sort of expand on the second bullet with a few things that, sort of stories from things that I've found. The obvious thing here about planting seeds early and knowing that they won't all grow, I mean, that seems entirely obvious because it's the same thing as establishing friendships, and, we all know how those go, and some of them work great and some of them don't, and they take a long time. So a couple of just sort of experiences that were eye-opening to me. I mean, one is that there were a few people who in my email sprinklings of my first year or two, contacted where we had a conversation and it seemed like it might go somewhere, and it didn't for a while, and then it came back around and it did. And I think that's where beginning to let your local regional network know you're there, know what you can do or intend to be able to do once you've established yourself better is important, because they will remember. Maybe they won't, but if they don't, then well, you tried. But I think there, for me, it was quite eye-opening that, the fact that I had done something like just sending that email and having a meeting with this person came around into then a few years later, when that person was ready to also move forward on collaboration, and I actually had something I could give to the collaboration because we'd actually done something in the lab by the time we had this more substantive conversation, then we put in a grant together, and that was great. And so that's where the second bullet comes into. I mean, I think we've all been in the situation where you're writing a grant and all of a sudden, the grant is due in 3 weeks and you needed a collaborator who does this. You just realized it because you're just late. So, I mean, I think your timing, and that's too late. And so your timing and, your collaborator being ready to jump in and put their all in to work with you, and, it's not going to happen. But I think continuing to plant the seeds and sow the seeds and keep up the lines of conversation builds a substantive relationship, helps you learn whether you can have a substantive relationship with person X. Do they communicate with you in a way that's effective and all that stuff, as well as having complementary research. And then I think when the time comes around and you do actually find yourself ready to start working on something in a real way, then you can tap into these things. I've had really good success with many collaborations that I've established, and I think there's been really one that I found was quite ineffective, and I think for sure ending those that don't work is important too. And sometimes it takes a while to figure out that you're not your style and someone else's style don't go well together. So I think you don't want to compromise your approach and the way that you approach the way that you execute research, and you feel that you should in order to. Yeah.
Did you actively end that collaboration or passively end it? Sort of pocket veto, let it go, or did you?
Yeah, so it was a 3-person collaboration, and so I'll say that I probably would have just let it passively go. I'm not so wimpy that I wouldn't be assertive about things if I needed to be, but I think in that case, had I not picked up the phone, it would have probably died, and that would have been fine with me. This was a 3-person collaboration, and so I had a close colleague and then this other person that we were working with. And so it did not end passively, it ended quite actively because of a complete meltdown between the other 2 people, which isn't how I would have ended it, but on the other hand, I had to agree with my closer colleague in terms of the reasons for the demise. So this person's approach was, not workable in terms of the expectations and the communication style. So yeah, I mean, I think to me the best way to do this, I mean, if a passive end meets all the needs, I don't know, I think it's okay. I mean, if both parties have recognized it's not working and you let it die, fine. I think the other alternative is, stating the problem to the person as needed, and I think that can work as well. I'm not sure I would have chosen the approach that my 2 collaborators chose, but that's that's how that one went. So yeah. Yeah, so I think those are the main things. Longer term, I think, the comment earlier was that obviously the world's leading expert in whatever you need as a collaborator does not obviously always exist in the local regional area. So I think here's where the longer term and larger scale sorts of the longer distance collaborations can also work, though they can be more challenging for many reasons. And I think those are the sorts of things that start to really become findable and blossom once you are, out routinely presenting your work, networking at, international or national meetings and finding people in that way. And then I think, that becomes the natural source of it. So part of the reason for all the questions before on resources in terms of personnel was this, because obviously it's also, as you build your research program, then building an effective group is essential. And I think just a few comments here, and again, I know the environment I sit in is different from the one that it sounds like you guys sit in many ways, but I think, some personal opinions here. I think recruiting trainees from your institution is often a great place to start. If possible and if available. I think some of the benefits of having a research trainee as a person working with you are that they also are often committed to building a career in research and possibly as an independent investigator. And I think in many cases, for that reason, they are more willing to work hard and seek creative solutions. So with that being said, I think I've worked with fantastically creative technicians as well. So I think it really is very person dependent. I think maybe the contrast here is, there are times when you're going to send something out and have, a commercial lab execute an analysis for you because you don't have the resources to do it, and that's fine. And I think you'll get what you need to some extent, but I think if you can have someone who is a trainee in your lab or as a collaborator's trainee do the research, I think there's where if you bring in someone who's committed to having that research problem get solved as opposed to somebody who's doing it because it's their job, I think that's where the line gets drawn. And there's no particularly black and white line, because I think, again, many times, whatever your title is, as long as a person is really invested in understanding and seeing the project go to fruition, I think that's what spurs them to do the hard work and look for the creative solutions and to notice the funny things about, I executed this experiment and the result was this, and gosh, I noticed these other funny things on the side, but, if I'm doing this as a work for hire, I'm just going to deliver the whole batch over, and I'm not going to tell you very much about the fact that there was something funky going on over here. And if I'm working for you, then I'm probably going to be like, gosh, Matt, keep the, I noticed when I did this experiment that, the result we were looking for was not exactly what we were looking for. And in addition, I noticed that all of the, animals that were treated with component X also did this, whatever. I think that's when, in some cases, you identify a significant flaw in your hypothesis, but also you can find, I think, some results in unexpected directions in that way. My experience with postdocs has been that, the success rate in terms of finding good postdocs has just gone up as I've gotten more experience. And so, it was difficult, especially in the first couple of years or so, to find postdocs that wanted to work for me because, I had no publications in the first year as an independent scientist and all the obvious reasons. So I think postdocs can be invaluable if and when, you're at a point where you want to hire a postdoc, but certainly it's not worth the investment if you can't find someone who really does check off the boxes that you are looking for.
So initially, like in my stage where I'm like very early career, so when I have a fellow or a postdoc working with me, like so obviously I have just like one project, right? So that person is going to be working on like my project. So is it like their project or my project? Like how does it work? Because they also need to have their own project. It's supposed to be like they should have their own publications and their own results. They should be presenting and things like that. And I'm also in like almost similar situations. So how do I balance that?
If you're hiring the postdoc, you are the one who you're providing the house where the research is going to be done. You have initiated the project, and it's understood that whenever you do a project with any staff, with any personnel, that there should be a contribution from everybody in terms of the projection, the direction forward of the research. And so when it comes to, and maybe the question is related to publications and that sort of thing, or is it related to
in general, like, because like say for example, like I have a project, like beginning to do it, and then I have my mentor, and then I have a fellow or a postdoc, joining me to do like pretty much what I had planned to do. So
I mean, that's, I guess, I'll give you the best advice I can from the perspective that I have. I mean, I think it's important so there's two aspects to this. I think one is just the what do I own as a person in the lab? What is that there's a need for a sense of ownership over what you're doing. Right. And then the other piece is the publication piece, which I think is one of the two. Or maybe not, I don't know. So I think in terms of project ownership and having multiple personnel who are working, for example, on the same grant, I think it's really important to be as clear as, and so in this case, it might be you and the person, and you're working on the same project. And in my case, it's several people working on the same project, and I'm not one of them because I'm not ever in the lab. But in either case, I think it's really essential to be clear about defining what parts of that are going to be led by you and what parts are going to be led by the other person. That doesn't mean that you're entirely responsible for the things that you're leading, but that you are going to take ownership for, digging to the bottom of X phenomenon. And you might ask your postdoc to go do a Western blot because they do a lot of Western blots towards your phenomenon, but you're still sort of the PI, the leader of that. Yeah, I mean, and you are the PI, so there's where, this is a little different from what I've experienced, but I think for me, it's having two persons who are working maybe on the same project, but I think you do need to clearly define these things, this aspect of the project, and maybe it's, leading the animal studies and you're going to lead the mechanistic studies in cells or something like that, and, having two people. It doesn't mean that they don't ever work together or that one person doesn't help the other, but it does mean that they each know what they will be responsible for seeing through to the end. And I think that that's important, even if it's you and the postdoc working next to each other, if that makes sense. In terms of publications, there's nothing, you should be the senior author on the publications and the postdoc should be the junior author. And in all cases, that's recognized that you both put in a substantive scientific contribution. You both have put your brains into the idea, but that is maybe more clearly defined. But in the lab, in the daily lab sort of environment, I think it is also, to the best of your ability, I think you want to try to define what parts you're really going to drive forward and what parts you want a postdoc to drive forward. Because I think if you're trying to do a balancing act where, today I'm going to be, and I fully understand that I don't have the same clinical challenges of like, oh gosh, I didn't know that I had to do, or I got called in randomly, and now there are going to be times where you have to call on them to do some things, right? But maybe the most important thing there is just defining the things that you're going to be leading forward. You're going to lead this forward, and it's not going to go, maybe you tell the person to do an experiment for the purpose of getting this aspect of the project forward, but you're going to be the brain driving this bit of it forward, and the postdoc will be the brain driving that bit of it forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like that was just like my dilemma in sense, like, because as like when I was a fellow, like, it was like, okay, this is like my project. Like there was, because my mentor had like many projects going on, and so like I was responsible for this project, and then I had worked with technicians to make sure that I got these things done on time too. So that's kind of what I am doing now as an attending.
Mm-hmm.
And so I find it difficult to define, like, when I have a fellow working with me, like, I have just one project, and how much is her responsibility. Like, it's more like I feel like I'm using her as a technician versus what is expected out of a fellow. I don't know if that makes sense.
So I can tell you how I approach that with fellows in particular. Sometimes it's even like a clinical faculty member that wants to participate in a project.
Yeah.
You have a goal for your research. I don't know specifically how you would say it, like understanding the mechanisms of pulmonary hypertension. There's a bigger goal that you want to get to. And you have very specific objectives that you're working on right now.
Right.
So I always make it clear within the space of this goal, I want the fellows to think about other things to do, but I also need them to accomplish this specific objective, whether that's part of an aim from a grant or something, so that they always have to stay within your overall goals, or if they start straying into something that's not helping you, then it becomes a little more difficult to manage that situation. But I think if you can articulate for your project that this is where you want to get to, and that these are the things you're working on right now, these are the immediate objectives, and just say you're in charge of these objectives, and have them really think about other things they could contribute to leading to the overall goal. That's how they carve out their additional space, but it has to be in conjunction with you. They head toward the goal for your research. You have to help the fellow develop, even though you're developing yourself.
Yeah.
But you cannot, especially as a young faculty, you cannot do that in a way that detracts from your ability to move forward.
Yeah.
And I found that to be the simplest way to go about it. Just, if you've got a grant or even a proposed grant, share it with them and say, look, this is the overall intent. I need you to work on aim 2, and then let's talk about other ideas that you have in this broader context.
No, that's it. And that's, I mean, I think with postdocs in particular, I have often also given them a fellow that I've given them, I have all my postdocs, they're given a chunk of generally time. But they in particular, more so than my grad students, they get some of this, but less so than the postdocs. I mean, the postdocs, I ask and expect them to do what I've asked them to do, but I also allow them I've had great experiences with postdocs being creative and coming up with new ideas that are related to things that they're doing on my grant, and that have then spun out into new work that now is funded. So I think it can really be a benefit as long as they do what you want them to do too.
So, and then when you say like a junior author and senior author with publication, so it means like the junior author is like author and the senior author is like
Yeah.
Or are there other?
Well, there's other complications.
Very much so. Yeah. I mean, there's some situations where you want to be the first author.
Right.
Even if you are more senior to the folks in the middle, and the senior author may be your mentor. There are other times when you may want to be the senior author and have junior people be in the middle or the first author. But I mean, I think it's a little bit different maybe than
perhaps
than in other areas. But for promotion, you need to have a certain number of first author publications. Certain levels of academic promotion, at least at Jefferson, but then at a different time, right, you have to have some senior author publications, but you can't be a senior author on a paper that you did most of the work on, but you were working for someone or working with a mentor. Does that make sense?
Right.
I think it's very paper specific and project specific.
Right. So
that's been my
kind
experience.
of like the problem with like when you work with fellows, because by the end of their fellowship, they need to have a first author manuscript.
Yes.
So then I would automatically have to become, if I work with a fellow, the last author, which I guess is not the worst thing either. I still have a paper and stuff, but how good is that for my own personal career promotion? Is it better for me to not work with a fellow and work with a technician and be the first author on the paper? Or work with a fellow, let her be the first author, and I be the last author.
Yes,
I would deflect in part because I publish everything right now as the senior. That's how I was promoted, and that I'm supposed to do, so I don't have data
It's a
point
little
with that.
different, and clinical journals have a little bit different sort of rankings of authorship and what counts for. So that's one point. There's also more and more journals are specifying what it means to be an author. Sure. Criteria. So the days where you would put the division chief in a clinical setting on a paper just because they were the division chief and the senior person are gone. Yeah. And that's supposed to happen anymore, but that's how a lot of people would get 600, 700 publications, some of which they never saw. So keep those things in mind. But there's the sequence in clinical journals are often whoever did the most work goes first in terms of getting that product published. And that includes doing the research, doing the writing, doing the editing, approving the final manuscript. Those are all authorship criteria.
It's not just the lab work.
It's not just the lab work. Getting the publication ready to go. And then it goes from the first person, the second person, the third person. I've even heard editors talk about, well, if you go from first to second, that person doing half as much as what you can. And there are journals, I had this issue, they didn't, if you have more than 5 authors, they argue back with you, you can't possibly have more than 5 authors.
Contributing substantively to this project.
So you have to keep that in mind, and that is distinct from how a lot of scientific journals. There's also one more thing that you should be really attentive to as junior faculty. So even if you're working with a very senior person, so you're not going to be first because the fellow's writing it. You're not going to be last because there's a more senior person who wants to be last. You could be second in corresponding. And in fact, that counts towards promotions and tenure more than just being second author. So being the corresponding author is sort of your anchor position. And you can be the last author and not correspond. And that doesn't mean as much as being the last author and the corresponding author. So back to your actual question was, which is better, having the fellow write it and you be senior, or you write it and then not work with the fellow?
You're the fellow, right? So it's going to be their first time ever. So you pretty much do the majority of the work.
Shouldn't be doing the majority of the work. You can edit a lot, but the idea is the fellow, if they're going to be the first author, they got to be the first author. Do it. And
which
make that clear.
Can take longer for you as the editor, but
and it did with the PICU fellow I worked with. You know, it took a long time to get that paper out the door, but I was very clear with her up front. This is what it means to be first author, and you need a first author manuscript for your fellowship. So this is what you're going to have to do. And it's not a zero-sum game. Not that it's either you or the fellow. It should be that you'll get both. If you're working on something and they're working on something, you should get your first author manuscript and your senior author manuscript out the door. If the fellow is pulling the weight that they should be pulling and doing this. It's a tough thing to juggle, but going back to it's hard to get fellows when you're younger and finding a good fellow. PostOps, the same general idea, is hard. The fellow should be hard charging, picking up most of the work, and even if they are not adept at putting the manuscript together, they just fire drafts at you so that you can edit them and get back to them.
Right.
That should be what happens.
And you can go back and tell them big picture edits as well on this amendment process. You can go back and kind of rewrite this because it needs to have needs to articulate the goals clearly and explain the impacts and none of this stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think I usually start with a really detailed outline for these sorts of things. Go through the process of initial draft where I'm literally just moving chunks around and having them rewrite for specific purposes and then get into the more.
Are you and the fellow the only people that would be on the paper?
What is that?
Are you and the fellow the only people that would be on the paper in your mind? Okay.
There'll be like the lab technician and stuff, but
anybody senior to you who's had a substantial role in the
mentoring part of it. But I'm just thinking between me and the fellow that I'm doing more, or which kind of happens because the fellows have a lot of clinical responsibilities and it's not like they're available all the time. So, and it's my project, so I have more devotion to it than the fellows. So I would be end up doing more work on it, and then I have trouble defining how much I should give them the credit versus not.
It's a hard thing to do, and you may have to include the fellowship preceptor in a conversation about what's required to be a first author in this field for this type of journal that you're shooting for, so that they're all very clear. I know I'm trying to not guess what you're talking about. I know in some of the clinical fellowship programs, the preceptors aren't even that aware of more basic research publications and what it takes. So they're often pushing, you got to get this out, you got to get this submitted, just write it up, which you can do with retrospectives and you can do with certain types of research. In the bench research that you're doing, if you don't have the experiments done or they need to be repeated or there's additional data or something came up that you need to run another control, that sort of delays writing up the manuscript. And if you find yourself doing more of that work, of the real work, you should be if you're going to do the work and write the manuscript, you should be the first author. And if the fellow has a problem with that, their response should be to figure out how they can do the work that's necessary, not a negotiation after the fact of, well, I need to be first. It's a tough conversation to have. A lot of departments have gone through these sort of, put the fellow first because they need to get the
position. Because that's the fellowship program, right? So they would go like what's
amazing
for the program versus.
I think you have to be careful, Deepthi, because you have to be thinking about yourself and also being a good mentor to the fellow.
Right.
The fellow should have a specific project that they can take ownership of and do enough of the work and contribution to that they can get a first author publication out of, but not at the expense of all the work you may have put into it. So if there's a larger project that you're going to be the driver of and you're going to be the lead author on, piece of that is theirs, and that's what they turn into their SSC project and publication. If they're the same exact project, that's tough because you're going to have lots of external pressures. I think your integrity and your ethics decide what to do.
You're not doing
you're not doing the fellow any favors.
You're not doing the fellow any favors by putting them out there on this piece of work that is now in the major scientific literature when they really don't. They didn't do it. They don't know. They're just going to end up looking bad. What they want is something they can hang their hat on and say, look, for my fellowship, I did this, and be able to talk about it and present it in a way that clearly shows the other people they're talking to that they did the work. It makes everyone look bad if you have the first author on a major publication who really doesn't know what they're doing, because it's sniffed out immediately. Well, the fellow didn't do it. They clearly can't answer any questions now, and that makes the rest of the team look bad too, because you're just kind of pushing this information out the door without clearly attributing it to the people. So it's a hard thing, and the fellows are under a lot of pressure.
Right.
But they either respond to the pressure or they don't. And by coming into a laboratory situation, I did have these conversations with intensive care folks. It's a risk. It's a risk within the time frame of the fellowship to shoot for this big paper. That the person I'm talking about. It was a biomaterials paper that got out, and it was not an easy thing. And the fellow did a great job. It took a lot more work than they were expecting, but I laid that all out ahead of time, and they just need to know. And if the fellow makes the decision, okay, I want to go for it, they need to know up front what it is that they need to do. So if you're in that situation now, we can talk. For you and I and your mentor can have a conversation about what to do from here. But don't shoot yourself in the foot to help a fellow a little bit, or even actually hurt the fellow in the long run by putting them as a first author on something. And you guys don't get clinical fellows.
No, and this is different from, there are some really big differences from the postdoctoral thing, I think, for sure. So anyway.
Yeah, and I guess it's a similar situation if I have to start working with a postdoc, and we work on the same project, so who's going to be on it? I guess if it's my project, I should set my foot down.
Yes,
right up front.
Be like the last
from the very beginning.
Because it wouldn't be there if it weren't for you, right? You wouldn't be hiring a postdoc if it weren't your project.
All right,
Put it
thanks.
back. Hit the tape.
I'm sorry. I mean, otherwise you get into these very difficult situations, and the only person that loses is the nice person. That's not how it's supposed to be. You have to be fair. You also have to know what's right for your career and what's wrong for theirs potentially.
Yeah, I guess that's my concern with working with fellows.
It does make it
The
challenging.
program wants
The pressures from the
the
program.
fellow to be like the first
Well,
in the manuscript or be the one presenting and all these national things, but
They don't do it.
doesn't
No, but
really work that
I
way.
I took Rob's advice, having not heard it, but every time a fellow in GI came to talk to me about the research I was doing, I made it very clear to them what would happen and what they would need to do and what their expectations were and all that, and nobody's come back. I don't know if that's because they don't like me or they don't like the project or they realize that they can't get it done in their timing. And they've all had some good projects, but I think it's very important to set the
And it's very difficult to
early.
get a project like from start to finish
in
without
3
putting
years.
the
Yes.
extra
Oh my
effort.
gosh.
Like if you're not going to come in your post call or if you don't want to come
Now,
on
if you can,
certain days, that you cannot get the project done because
but if you can carve out a piece of an aim or even an aim in your larger project, and that can be the fellows to do over 3 years, and the timing works out, that to me that could work really well. Over your ears, but having a summer student, she's not going to do everything, but she can be very valuable to a specific piece, and she has ownership of it. And go from there. So.
I can keep going. We're running over time. Is that okay, or do you?
oh sorry, I guess I didn't.
I think that's okay. Aaron will come in and tell us when we're.
Okay. I don't think I have too much more on, but so we've mostly covered this. I think. Sorry, the end is cut off a little bit there. This may be obvious things, but I think there are lots of ways to get the word out in terms of self-promotion and networking. And I think a few things that I had wanted to comment on, some of them are super obvious. I mean, I think when you can get out and present your work at various meetings, I think this is valuable, especially I think if you have a publication that has just come out or is about to come out, you can showcase it, which can really up the impact and the visibility of the publication and the work, and allows you to have the conversations with your colleagues. And again, things that may be obvious, but I mean, I think in terms of manuscript reviews as well as proposal reviews, it's essential to know the friend if possible, but certainly know your reviewers. And having sat on lots of panels, one does one's best as a reviewer of a paper or of a grant to be unbiased, but I think there's an automatic sort of, as soon as you can put a face and a personality with a grant proposal, then I think people are nicer and appreciate more that, that there are going to be some flaws, because there are always flaws, but that those are surmountable flaws, especially if they know you, they'll feel this way more so. So that's one thing. I think other things in terms of the self-promotion and networking thing, certainly ask your senior colleagues to put a word in for you. If you can get opportunities to give talks, seminars, etc. Outside, again, this can increase your visibility. There's nothing wrong with asking senior colleagues to do this. They're expecting you to. I think service opportunities, and I realize this may be entirely different in this context than in the one that I'm in, but in a very general sense, I think that certainly service is something that can be a time sink, but there can be extremely valuable service opportunities both internally and externally. I think organizing a symposium, organizing part of a meeting, those sorts of things are a great way to also really work closely with the scientists who are ultimately going to be your reviewers for grant proposals and that sort of thing. And so that can be really valuable. Internally, I think, you're figuring out your career, you're trying to figure out what are the possible places, how does your institution work? And certainly you have an idea of that, but I think the more that you understand some of the leadership within your institution, the better idea you'll have of what makes a expertise, money, and hires flow in different directions, and ways that you might begin to grow your career and what you might be interested in terms of growing your career. So I think that's a really good reason to do the right types of internal service. It's annoying at some level to apply and for awards, but I think this is also important. It sounds silly, but winning early career awards is essential to winning the more senior level awards. So it's a process that builds on itself. And again, this is just another way that you really can build visibility, even if it feels false sometimes. I think it's an important component to think about. And so when we're looking, I don't know what's available here. We're building more of a network at UD in terms of there being a central location where one can go and look for early career awards and awards that are suitable for what your discipline is.
I'm confused. Do you mean award as in recognition or award as in funding?
So in some cases, funding awards, but also, there are young faculty awards through the American Chemical Society, through the American Institute of Chemical Engineers. So all of the professional networks will often recognize scientists for the trajectory of work they've done, under 40 or under whatever the criteria are and those sorts of things. Sometimes these are grants. So the NSF has a career award, which is a grant that also goes along with recognition in the form of ones. But yeah, so I think things. And this is the last thing I have, and the last couple things I have. These are really quick, mostly because I saw that the other talks you've heard in this context seem to focus really very heavily on grant writing. But just a few pointers. I think it's really invaluable understanding the funding institutions and also in particular the programs to which you want to apply. It seems maybe obvious that you would need to know the mission of the institution, but I think it's really important to begin to understand and then also to articulate in your grants how your little tiny problem that you're working on is related to both the mid-level and also the big picture goals within the funding institution. And especially if you can start having the conversations with program directors, going and looking at the sort of trajectories forward. You want to get a sense for in the institutions and programs that you want to get money from. You want to know what they want to do in the next 5 years. I think there's things to learn both from looking at what they have funded recently and also what they want to fund moving forward. You can talk to program directors and find out what they have in their research portfolio in terms of a mixture of types of projects, and this can tell you, number one, what sorts of things they have a whole lot of and probably don't want more of, and you can also get a sense for what are they missing, and that doesn't mean that you're going to then go do research because they're missing something and you can't do that anyway. But if you're able to pitch your work as something that it's innovation, there's a unique aspect of it that would fill that part of their portfolio, that can be a great way to produce something that is going to be exciting to them as well. And keeping in mind that the program managers, yes, they do have to go based on reviews and rankings and these sorts of things, and it differs depending on the different places that you apply for money. But in the end, they care their job. They care very much what is their little bin of things that they have funded, and what types of things, and is it diverse, and is it building towards the next so many years goal to build in whatever systems biology or whatever. So I think getting a sense for what they want, what kinds of research nuggets do they want to be able to incorporate into their portfolio of funded work is important. And so again, lots of information on websites. Talk to your colleagues who sat on funding on study sections or programs, program review panels that are the ones that you want to apply for to find out some of this. Seek opportunities to be a reviewer for sure. I know there's a program through NIH where you can do this, and I haven't tried it, so I don't know how easy it is to do.
It's a little tricky.
Yeah.
They have some requirements that are a little challenging to meet.
Yeah.
When you're in the position where you'd be most helped by being a reviewer.
Yeah, understood.
It's still worth looking at, I agree.
Yeah, I think,
But you know,
if possible, seek opportunities to be a reviewer.
You can also get asked to review papers for journals when you've published in that journal, if it's a topic in that paper. I mean, it's not the same for grant writing, but it's still doing some
I think
review.
you can learn for sure. I mean, certainly you can learn components of good communication and ways to frame your work through doing paper reviews as well. I mean, I think there's definitely a difference, and even if it's reviewing small grants that aren't maybe there are small grants within the institution, that sort of thing. I mean, I think you can get quite a few ideas about successful as well as unsuccessful writing strategies from this, just by seeing a diversity of proposals, even though it's time-consuming to do. And, for the most part, I mean, you can ask senior colleagues to take a look at their grants that are successfully funded, and many of them will certainly share, but that's a more awkward way to to sort of sample writing, and obviously it gives you a very narrow window of examples. I think also actually working with collaborators is a great way to become a better writer, communicator, grantsman, because you will also learn from your colleagues and the strategies that they use. And then they're reading your work very closely because they care about it too. And it's a great way to have people read your stuff in detail. And then I think the other piece of being a proposal reviewer on an actual panel, study section, et cetera, is that you get a very clear window on not only the review process, but also the personality of the study section or panel. So what kinds of things does this typical group of people that reviews for this program, study section, et cetera, what do they like to see? What kinds of things do you hear comments on? What are the ways that they're organizing the reviews of the different grants? How do they bin them into different categories in order to, are there ways that you can, essentially, how can you maximize your success based on the types of criteria that they weigh as most important? So I think that's a good reason to do that. And again, I know I saw like pages and pages of grant writing tips from the past seminars you heard. So I just put in a few tiny ones, which are really not, complete in any way. But a couple of things that stand out in my head when I think about grant writing in terms of advice I've gotten. I know you've heard this before, but page one is really essential. I had a program manager tell me, and I think she was right, that reviewers really have made their decision by the end of the first page, even if it's a 12-page grant. And then they're going to go through the rest of the grant and figure out reasons to support the decision that they've already made. So if they liked it, they're going to figure out reasons that they can support in their review that they liked your grant. And if they thought it stunk, then they're going to go through and pick up every stupid little thing that every grant has flaws. They're going to pick them up if they didn't like it on page one. And so because of this, obviously that isn't meant to sort of be as stressful as just, this is where you're going to spend the majority of your time. And really, you want to address all of the review criteria on page one. And so for NIH grants, I'm starting off, and the first paragraph generally has something to do with the significance. The next paragraph has something to do with the innovation. Then I'm laying out the approach and the aims. And then I'm going in and putting in a comment. Maybe I don't cover environment explicitly, but I'm certainly putting in a comment about I have my team. Here's my team. Here's how we're going to do it. And it may be 4 lines long, but it's all there on page one. And I think that is an important thing to keep in mind, especially if they end up reading it at 2 o'clock in the morning and they're getting awfully tired. At least if they read page one and got excited, then they're going to be on your team as well. Maybe the obvious ones, I think relating the crux of the problem to the innovation in your solution. So I think you can build a significance thing where you talk about how important the problem is, but if you don't relate it to the innovation in your solution, then it's not going to bear weight. So you really want to have the innovations be addressing the specific problem that exists and then building your aims around those innovations. Certainly seek feedback from as many diverse collaborators and colleagues. And again, collaborators are a great way to have really detailed reads of your work. If you can, leave lots of time, because I, from experience, know that when you come back a couple of weeks or months later to reading a grant, you realize the parts that are bad that you didn't see previously. And last thing is just, I think, again, it's important to to show that you have your team when you're writing grants, and you want that team to be a substantive team, because I think it's really very obvious when it's not. Crash course with, whatever the word is, doesn't include everything.
No, but sometimes it helps to hear a summary of the larger talk from a different perspective, and it triggers some of those key things.
Yeah, well, hopefully. Yeah. Thanks for the conversation. I don't know if there's anything, I know we went long, but.
Yeah.
So if you guys have other kind of questions or anything, or Sullivan's accessible. Does better with email than I do.
I don't know.
You don't know?
I try, but.
I would, so one other suggestion, I guess, because you brought up getting to review manuscripts and getting to review grants, it's to let the senior people in your field know that you're interested in doing that. Especially for papers, I don't know how many requests for reviews.
Too many.
Way too many. So I'll do them, especially if I know the editor or the particular interest of mine, or it's a top journal, I just want to keep my hand in the door. But what I also do is I'll say, well, John Slater, I can't do this, but you should contact John Slater or somebody that I know who could review it, but isn't necessarily on the editor's radar. Yep. But I touch base with them about that ahead of time. Were they interested? So if you let people know that you're interested in doing that kind of thing, what you'll find is you'll get too many. And then you can start picking what ones you really want to do. And it's a similar thing for being on study section, but knowing the study section members, if you know previous members, the pathway to being junior investigator against one of those slots is very dependent on the admin, the SRO, but the scientific review officer knows all the study section members. If I go and say, hey, I'm not going to be able to do this anymore, but so-and-so has similar, they're new, but they have similar expertise, similar background, that goes a long way to them, inviting them to come. But it's I think a lot of what Millie was talking about, getting your name out there, letting people know what you work on and what you're interested in, critical early on. And part of that can be, looking at manuscripts. Fantastic.
Thanks so much.
Well, thanks, guys.
All right, thank you very much.